I'm pumped, guys. This is the first time that I've ever shot f1.2, the first time that I'm ever using YouTube to fund a video that I wouldn't otherwise have made, and the first time working with a company in the camera space on a project. We've got a lot going on in this image. Number one, if you guessed PolarPro, ding ding ding, they've sponsored this video by gifting me a Peter McKinnon Variable ND Mist Edition 2, a quartz line mist filter, and a 77 to 82mm step-up ring. Number two, that was shot on the DS version. Not this lens right here. I've rented both, so the direct comparison video between this 85 to the DS is up next. They share a ton of similarities though, so let's take a look at this lens, compare it to the affordable alternatives that I've already reviewed on this channel, and immediately following this video, we'll compare it to the DS version. Reverse order and starting with the ugly, as you might expect from top tier RF glass, this is expensive as hell. But that's the one true ugly, and the good news is that if you pay the troll toll, you're paying away all the true bad. The bad that I do go on to mention is more nitpicking when we're talking about a lens like this. These behemoths aren't a great fit for my personal lens roadmap, so I've rented these from lens rentals to experience the f1.2 bliss as opposed to selling my organs. And on to the bad, looking at the build, this lens isn't just heavy, it's big and heavy. If you're like me and you're using these smaller primes, if you like the f4 zooms, this really does jump out at you right away to the point where it makes it awkward to swap out lenses. The filter size is 82mm, so that's already larger than the 77 of the f4 zooms that I have. It's different than the Rokinon 1.4, which is also a 77. My first instinct was to grab at the largest part of the barrel, but the focus ring and the control ring start sliding around on you and your life starts to flash before your eyes. The focus ring is buttery smooth on this copy, so at least that's a plus. The thinner portion of the barrel is too short to do anything with, so I ended up just kind of going right at it over the front of the lens. Basically, every time I've gone to swap it, I just wish there was a little bit more comfortable way of doing so. And more annoying than that, it was a complete pain in the ass when it came to arranging my bag. I had to redo all the foam inserts to be able to fit this in. If I had purchased this lens over recently purchasing the Rokinon, I wouldn't be able to fit everything in the f-stop bag anymore. And finally, while the sheer weight may feel premium, that's also part of the downfall. Before getting these lenses, I unfortunately crashed into the boards playing hockey and likely separated my dominant shoulder. It's healing, but it's definitely not what I would have wanted while testing two heavy lenses. I did my best to make the most of the rental windows while I had these two lenses at the same time, but it definitely did make me more cognizant of hauling around the weight. There's a lot of glass here, and as a result, the focusing is just maybe a tad slower than the Rokinon. This lens has a minimum focus distance that's slightly closer though, so that's kind of nice. And although I'm demonstrating this on the RP while we talk about it, the RP ergonomically is definitely not a great fit for this. You would want the extra little grip, or ideally something like the R6, R5. And although I didn't have the chance to test it, I think the battery grip on the R6 and R5 would feel better with a lens like this just to begin with. Bum shoulder or not, I'm not going to be hauling this lens on longer hikes like I've already done with the Rokinon. Because I'm not making my living shooting portraits in the studio, having a more maneuverable 85 is key, despite the fact that the image quality coming out of the Rokinon is not quite up to that Canon L glass standard. It was honestly even a bit awkward to hang from the capture clip given the weight and size. If you can dance past the cost, size, and weight, this lens is a long, low light beast. And I do specifically mean this 85, because as we'll get into in the next video, the DS version of this lens isn't quite the low light beast that this one is. Having an f1 point whatever is why I sold my 100mm macro for the Rokinon Samyang 1.8, and it's why this 1.2 is going to be a beast at weddings, indoor events, or anywhere where you need to shoot that's especially dark. f1.2, 1/200th of a second, and ISO 6400 is fast enough to eliminate most blur. It's going to make for a lot of really usable images in dark places on the R5 and the R6. The Rokinon has a pretty heavy vignette at f1.4 straight out of camera. You can clean that up in Lightroom, but this Canon performs better there, and it handles chromatic aberration better too, and it should, given the price differential. It's as sharp as you would expect, and while I haven't used the EF85 myself, based on watching other reviews, it seems like a pretty hefty jump coming from that lens, if you can stomach the additional size and cost. And if you don't specifically need the low light ability, there's still something about the magic pop you get at this aperture, at this focal length. Subjects jump off their dreamlike surroundings. Their close portrait eyes are tack sharp, ears and noses fall away. You know, not the look you'll always want, but with the eye detect on these R bodies, I don't know, It's just lovely. I wouldn't have the skill to get such high keeper rates if I wasn't fully trusting this body to do the heavy lifting for me. It's a wonderful time to be a photographer where I can work on my other frustrations in my journey as opposed to just worrying about hitting focus. And like I mentioned, I'm not a portrait photographer. This becomes a combo walk around slash street slash lifestyle product lens. I don't even know. I just know that I love shooting with it and shooting what I had around on hand for the short trip. And what I'm personally really thrilled about for me and for others is that you can get a lot of this experience at a lot less of the cost when you look at the Rokinon or you look at the Canon Macro f2. If you're shooting video at wide open apertures like f1.2 and f1.4, and especially at 24 or 30 frames per second, you may need to introduce an VND filter to help you keep consistent with the 180-degree shutter rule. For example, the PM filter is on and set to 2 stops so that I can retain that 1/50th of a second shutter. I can get the exposure in the ballpark and retain that shallow depth of field. Trying this without the filter, and hold on. We've got some melted, overexposed garbage. To shoot an even stronger light, like outdoors midday, you might need the 6 to 9 stop version of this filter. And besides that little shot, the quartz line mist has been on this whole time. Off, on, off, back on, and this is a stylistic choice. If you're new, I've compared moment cine blooms. I usually run the 10% on these videos here, and I will certainly put the PolarPro mist filter up against those in a video soon to compare and contrast the features. If you want to support PolarPro and I, check out their filters using the affiliate link in the description. And if nothing else, check out their podcast Golden Hour with Dave Mays. It's one of my favorites. And if you've watched any of my freelance updates, you know that podcasting is a big section of the work that I do. It's hard for me to feel super confident giving a strong buy recommendation here. Deep down, knowing your budget, your needs versus your wants, and your specific context, you know whether this is a tool that you need or whether it's kind of a gassy purchase. For me, for now, this lens fails on the case of the budget, it fails on the case of the need, and the Rokinon f1.4 satisfies the want that I have for a long, fast lens. If you fancy the macro and the lens image stabilization, maybe it's the Canon f2. And because of the investment, this is a good candidate to rent prior to purchase, particularly if you're deciding between this and something like the 70 to 200 f2.8, depending on your other needs. And if you're in, you still have to choose between this 85 and the DS version of the lens. In case any of my needs change or any of my shooting changes, I wanted to rent these at the same time to get an idea of which I would prefer later should I go on to purchase one in the far future. For now, we've got our Rokinon Samyang 85. We're gonna rock it.